mengukur 21st century. Bahwa pekerjaan-pekerjaan itu sudah sampai di titik itu. Kemudian AI and machine learning specialist, dan big data specialist. Kalau kita mau cari literatur saat ini sudah sangat pesat, kita bisa tahu data-data itu. Kalau kita sebagai researchers, berarti itu juga
jangan marah beta, dia cuma
marketing and strategy specialist.
Hello, we will start with Studium Generale very soon. Please be ready and turn the camera on. Thank you.
Good morning, Terp. Professor Lim.
Selamat pagi.
Recording in
Selamat pagi.
progress.
Satu itu aja dong. Satu suara.
How are you?
I'm good. Superb. Does my screen look fine?
Yeah.
Superb.
How's the weather in Taipo?
Is about 27 degrees today, which is good. Going to be autumn soon.
Yeah. We're having lots of rains.
Really?
So you're a typhoon.
No.
Here.
The typhoon is done here.
No, it's
The
here.
typhoon is done. Really? No. It's supposed to be traveling to the northwest, not the southeast. Yeah. Wrong number, man. Yeah.
Okay. Are we on time? Yes, we are.
We are good.
Stand. Okay. Sila Ibu Bapak panitia untuk memulai. It's stand already. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hello, good morning to all the participants of the Studium. Thank you for joining us today. The Honorable, the Dean of
Education Faculty at State University of Jakarta, Professor Dr. Fahurazi, MPD, the Honorable Professor LIM Cher Ping for the Education University of Hong Kong, the Honorable the Coordination for Education Technology Department, Mrs. Retno Wijaningrum as contact. The Honorable all the lecturers that has been training the Studium Generale and all of the students, especially Education Technology Department.
First of all, thanks to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala for giving us mercies and blessings so we can attend and gather here with a good and healthy condition. Please allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Adinda Skakarna from Educational Technology 2020. And also my partner.
My name is Priska Horonesa from Education Technology 2020. We will be the master of ceremony the event today. Studium Generale is an annual event that held by the Education Technology Department to provide the students with advanced knowledge about all learning environments and technologies. This year, we are very honored that we can invite Professor LIM Cher Ping from the Education University of Hong Kong to share knowledge and have discussion with us about the opportunities and challenges in implementing robot for higher education.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to tell you the agenda of the event. To begin, there will be an opening session by Master Ceremony. Next, we will hear a welcome speech by
Professor Dr. Fahurazi, Dean of the Educational Faculty. Then there will be a presentation by Professor LIM Cher Ping from the Education University of Hong Kong. Afterward, there will be a question and answer session for all of you. Last but not least, there will be a closing statement from our honored speaker and moderator and continue with a documentation session before we end the Studium Generale. Please pay attention to the presentation. You may prepare the question for the question and answer session later.
Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite Professor Fahurazi, the Dean of Education Faculty at State University of Jakarta, to deliver his welcome speech. Please welcome Dr. Fahurazi.
Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
How are you, Prof? Chen?
Good. Superb.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yang saya hormati Ibu Widi, Wakil Dekan, baik itu Wakil Dekan 1, 2, 3, Ibu Prodi, Ibu Retno. Di sini juga saya lihat ada Ibu Prodi MP, Bu Julaika, Bapak Ibu Prodi yang lain yang juga sudah bergabung, para dosen, baik itu dosen Prodi Teknologi Pendidikan dan juga program studi yang lainnya di lingkungan Fakultas Ilmu Pendidikan, para mahasiswa yang sudah hadir. Syukur alhamdulillah kita sudah hadir dalam kegiatan Studium Generale ini. Izinkan saya sedikit memberikan kata sambutan. Ya, mungkin ini dicampur-campur dengan bahasa Inggris ya, Bapak Ibu. Bisa mendengar suara saya jelas ya?
Iya, bisa Pak.
Jelas.
Welcome to Prof. Cher Ping. to Universitas Negeri Jakarta, Fakultas Ilmu Pendidikan. I was involved the first time in educational technology department. Have you virtually and currently UNJ is the quite familiar to you as you have been to our campus several years ago.
Yes. Like I've actually been to your campus at least about 2 or 3 times.
Yes.
And I think it was like hosted by the dean at that time, and also Humana was there. And at that time, I think as recently as 2017, I was there like the last time, I think, or like 2017, 2018, right? And in fact, when I was in Western Australia, there was a team that went down to visit me from UNJ to Perth for about like 2 or 3 days, right? So it had been quite a sustained engagement with like old friends. Okay, not old, but like old but not so old friends.
Yes. Thank you. Have discussion for FIPJIP November 10, Jakarta.
Yeah, the conference.
Yes, conference.
That's right. That would be in the November.
Yes. November 10th.
Yes. I would definitely be there. I think it is a 2 days thing, but I would only be joining the second day because the first day is like evening opening ceremony.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Lim.
All right. Thank you
Baik,
so much.
saya lanjutkan Bapak Ibu. Syukur alhamdulillah kita kedatangan narasumber yang luar biasa pada hari ini, dan ini merupakan terobosan yang dilakukan oleh teman-teman teknologi pendidikan dan narasumber untuk Studium Generale yang luar biasa, berbicara tentang bagaimana teknologi dan literasi itu saling bersandingan, di mana literasi pemahamannya adalah agar para mahasiswa memiliki pengetahuan, pemahaman bagaimana cara menggunakan berbagai teknologi yang ada pada saat ini. Dan pada saat ini juga kita dihadapkan kepada yang namanya MBKN, Kampus Merdeka Merdeka Belajar, yang nantinya ini juga akan menjadi pokok bahasan yang sangat penting yang akan disampaikan oleh Prof. Lim pada saat beliau menjadi narasumber pada conference FIPJIP pada tanggal 10 November yang akan datang. Sekali lagi saya mengucapkan terima kasih banyak kepada teman-teman Prodi Teknologi Pendidikan, Ibu Retno dan juga Pak Hirmana yang terus melaksanakan berbagai aktivitas akademik dengan mengundang para pakar yang ada di dalam bidangnya masing-masing. Dengan mengucapkan Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Studium Generale, program studi teknologi pendidikan yang dilaksanakan pada hari ini dengan mengundang salah satu pakar bidang pendidikan yaitu Profesor Cher Ping dinyatakan dibuka. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
All right.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Problem.
Thank you so much. So, do you want me to start now, or does the MC have more to say? The two MC, do you want to say something first?
Sorry, we want to present my first proposal to moderate the session. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Professor Lee, thank you very much for Professor Dr. Fahurazi MPD for the very meaningful opening speech. Now we are continue to the next agenda.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we start the session with Professor LIM Cher Ping, We would like to invite Mr. Dr. Andes R.A. Mana, Warga Direktur MSc Gigi, one of our beloved and honored education technology lecturer of Jakarta State University, to moderate the session. Please welcome Mr. Firman. Sorry, I didn't unmute your microphone.
Yes, thank you. You have to unmute me first. Okay. My thank you to the dean was not heard, so I'll thank him later. He was very busy this morning, but he made the time to be with us, and that is very it's very good. Okay, Professor Lim, I should say address you as Professor Lim. We have like an hour and a half to. I mean, we scheduled to adjourn by 11:30. So is it like a 30-minute presentation or 60-minute presentation with 30-minute discussion, or whichever that you prefer?
I think what we'll do is I will present some, and then after that, I would take some questions, and then after that, I will present more, something to that extent.
Okay, it's
right?
very
So it's going to be rather
interactive,
informal,
informal, okay. Alright. So Ibu Bapak, selamat pagi. Terima kasih sudah bergabung. Saya baru saja di unmute, jadi saya baru bisa berbicara. Terima kasih kepada Pak Dekan, Profesor Oktober Rozi. Saya sangat senang, tentu Prof. Lim juga sangat berbesar hati karena disambut oleh beliau langsung. Jadi tadi beliau mengatakan ini saya sudah menduga ya, beliau cenderung informal saja. Jadi beliau berbicara, dan kalau ada pertanyaan beliau akan berhenti untuk bisa melayani pertanyaan. Lalu lanjut lagi dengan pembicara berikutnya. He is a chair professor of learning technologies and innovation. That means he is not any common professor in this field. Jadi ini chair professor itu suatu orang yang terpilih memang ini pada bidangnya, pada learning technologies and innovation. Okay, let's start, Professor Lim.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Himana, and also thank you so much for the Dean to be able to join us despite your busy schedule. Selamat pagi to all the professors, docents, and mahadocents, right? And also to basically all the students, I think those that are doing your undergraduate, those that are doing your master's, and also your PhD. Right, so what I'm going to do like today, based on conversations that I have with Dr. Hilmana, right, is to be looking at the opportunities and challenges in implementing a robot-proof higher education, right? But I think the focus is not really about robot proving, right? But it's about first to have a sense of the context that higher education institutions are operating in now, right? In this time and age. Right, and then after that, like really thinking through what are some of the challenges and threats to the higher education system, right? Whereby AI robots is just one of the many threats, right? And what are the key competencies? What are the key mindsets that we need to have as lecturers and students, right, to be able to address these issues and challenges in higher education? And how could we embrace emerging technologies in such a way, right, that we are able to address these issues and challenges as well, right? So as what Dr. Hilmana said, I'm from the Education University of Hong Kong. It is quite important that you take a note at it, is the Education University of Hong Kong. It's not the University of Hong Kong Education Faculty, because I've got friends that always like mix it up, right? So it is like Universitas Pendidikan Hong Kong, right? Not Universitas Hong Kong, right? So there is the like the Pendidikan there, right? So you've got to really like keep that within your mind, yeah. Right. So what you could see in my background too is actually the campus. I hope that when the borders are open, like some of you, especially the professors and the docents and the leadership team, you would have a chance to be visiting this like campus, which is actually among the mountains in the countryside of Hong Kong. Yeah. Okay. What I'll do is I would first like try to give you a context of where the higher education system is being situated in, right, and the necessity to be able to try to develop a set of 21st century competencies, right, and this whole notion of learning how to learn and learning for life. I mean, in the publication by the Asian Development Bank in 2014, 2015, right? I'm not too sure if you have come across this particular report itself, right? There is this prediction, right, that by 2050, you would actually expect the Asia to be producing more than half of the global output, right? And you would be expecting Asia to be consuming more than 50% of that global consumption as well, right? And what we would be expecting too is that we would have 3 billion Asians being what we call like moving up to a middle class status, whereby they would be enjoying the same level of standards of living as those in Europe, right? The middle class in Europe, right? But I think if you actually take a look at my title, you would realize that I've got the question mark there, the Asian century, right? Like, why did I put that question mark? I mean, though this prediction is being done in such a way that it is based on economics data, right, over the last 2 decades, right, then there may be a slowdown, right, in the second largest economy, which is Japan, right? The largest economy is, of course, the United States, right? But the thing is, with the decline of the second largest economy, there's another huge economy that is rising at the same time in the last 2 decades, and that is actually China and also India, right? And it's not just China and India. If you actually take a look at the growth rate in Southeast Asia, right, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, right, in the last 2 decades, right, up to as recently as 4 to 5 years ago, right, the growth rate has been quite consistently 2-digit, right? And what is really impressive is that for these economies in Asia, right, when the global financial crisis struck in 2008, right, there were national bankruptcy in Europe, in the US, unemployment, housing sector collapse, banking sector collapse, right? But the thing is, when you take a look at Asian economy, it is pretty resilient, right? So which means that the prediction made by Asian Development Bank is something that has been taken quite seriously, right, by not just countries in Asia, but also countries in the West, including countries in the Pacific, like Australia, right? And if you actually take a look at this white paper that the Australian government have come up with in 2012, right, they have actually taken that prediction really, really seriously and like thinking through the economic policies and social policies and also international engagement policies, right, of Australia with respect to this surge in growth within Asia itself, the need to engage not just Southeast Asia, right, but the rest of Asia, including Northeast Asia and also South Asia. Right, so as what I've told you, that is that prediction that we would have 3 billion Asians that would actually be in the middle class, right, by 2030. And if you actually take a look at that growth of that middle class, is really, really very significant as compared to the rest of the world, right? If you take a look at the map itself, we are seeing that the middle class would have grown by 6-fold, right, as compared to North America, which is really stagnant, Africa, which is quite slight, Latin America, which is quite slight, but the Europe, continental Europe, as well as the UK, which is quite stagnant as well, right? So that is that expected huge growth in terms of the economy, in terms of the economics growth, right? In terms of the GDP and the GDP per capita, right? But again, there's that big question mark there, despite all this prediction and all this data. So why that question mark, right? And like, why do we need to ensure that our higher education system is actually able to meet up with these issues and challenges? Okay, if we actually take a look at the world, right? You know, it's like we talk a lot about globalization. Globalization is great, which means that, you know, it's like in Jakarta itself, in other parts of Indonesia, right? You have access to not just mobile phones that is made in the US, like Apple, right? But you would actually get the mobile phones, right, that are made in China as well, like Xiaomi, Huawei, as well as Oppo, right? So, and of course, you get the mobile phones that are made in like South Korea as well, right? So like there is just this huge variety of goods and services that you could like tap into for consumption. But the thing about globalization that we need to take note of is whatever happened in one part of the world, which would have huge implications in the rest of the world, right? And I'm quite sure that in Indonesia itself, you're already facing the blunt of the tension between the US and China, right? That at times you are forced to take sides, not just in terms of the politics, but also in terms of economic policies and in the economic engagement. So it may not be to do with the military, right? It might be to do with investments, right? You know, it's like, what if we are taking up too much investments from China? What signal are we going to be sending to the US, right? So, and if you take a look at the Brexit itself, huge impact on the British, but again, you know, it's like Brexit have a huge impact in Southeast Asia as well, right? With respect to trying to gain into the European market through the UK, which is going to be quite an issue now, right? Because if we actually take a look at Indonesia itself, it have great engagement with the British government and also the Dutch, like also the Dutch government itself, right? So again, like what would the impact of Brexit be, right, with respect to that relationship, right? And of course, if you take a look at the picture on your left, it's like the ISIS that is operating in the Middle East with the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. Like, what implications would it have to that region? But I think, like, what we are really afraid in Southeast Asia is what implications would it have, right, to terrorist cells and returnees of ISIS, right, or how the social media is used in such a way that it have an impact, right, upon our young people, and therefore carrying out certain acts, right, that might be a threat to the society, right? So this is globalization. It's like there are a lot of pros, a lot of opportunities, but there is also those threats. If we move closer to home, it's like we have been raving, it's like I have been actually like talking up about the really enormous growth, right, of the economies, especially in Southeast Asia, South Asia, 2 digits growth. Right, but with that 2 digits growth, you would see that socially there's a threat in terms of the income gap, right? The income disparities between the have and have-nots, right? As you see the high-rise building getting newer and more high-tech in the background. In the foreground, you see more slums, right? In the city area, in the suburb area, more homeless people, right? That disparity is getting bigger and bigger, right? And that disparity is actually a threat. It is not just a threat to the economy, but it's a threat. It's a social threat. It is a social threat that have implications, right, on the political stability of the country as well, if it is not addressed, right? And of course, like closer to home, this could be actually any beach in the world. It just happened to be a beach in Hong Kong, right? But it could have been Jakarta Bay, for example, right? As the economy is actually growing, the use of one-time use containers, right, are being just thrown and washed into the sea, threat to the environment. So that environmental decay is there as well. This is for those of you who do remember, this is the case in Hong Kong in 2019, right before the pandemic, right, where there was a huge social unrest. Quite often the outsiders would ask, is this just a tension, like a so-called political tension, or is it a social tension, right? Whereby the young people just totally lose hope in the society, right? I would reckon that quite often the argument that it is a mixture of both, right? So again, that social unrest, that loss of hope by the next generations, right, is again quite a threat to this whole notion of the Asian century, right? And this was actually the start of the conversation that I have with Dr. Humana, right, about trying to robot-proof, right, the higher education system. This was a McKinsey report that was out in 2017. Right, they made a very bold prediction, right, that by 2030, 800 million jobs globally will be lost to AI, right? It's huge, 800 million jobs, right? It is more than the population of Southeast Asia if you combine all the nations in ASEAN, right, it's actually still less than 800 million, right? It's huge, right? And I think it really drives home the fact that how will not just higher education actually responds, right, to this prediction, right? How do, for example, the SMK, right, the vocational schools and also the vocational institutions in Indonesia responds to this, and how education system as what type of competencies and mindset do we need, right, for the human capital to be able to tap upon AI in such a way that we will not be replaced, but in fact, we would be tapping upon it in such a way that we try to get the full potential of it, right? So that eventually we are able to ensure that AI is going to enhance what we are doing in terms of our work, in terms of our play, in terms of how we live, in terms of how we engage with nature and the environment. And I reckon that if we look at us in the higher education sector, it's actually one of the key driving force in ensuring that, because it is through human capital, right, that we are able to address this. So now the big question mark for us is, must this human capital have, right? What must it possess, right, in order to be able to address this? So yes, it's like the AI, robots and all, it's just one big piece of the key issues and threats, right? But globalization, environmental decay, social decays, those are huge issues as well that we need to think about, right? The pandemic does not help, right? It's not just a health crisis, it is a learning crisis. If we take a look at the learning during the pandemic in higher education, and especially from SD right through to SMR, right? I reckon that those that are situated in the city like Jakarta, Surabaya, Yogyakarta, yes, there's still an impact, but less impact as compared to if you are, let's say, in Jayawijaya in Papua, just for example, right? In one of the small like kampongs, right? In the highlands in Jayawijaya, right? How do you gain access to that learning, given that a lot of the learning are supposed to be conducted in a remote way because of social distancing, right? And of course, geographical location is one, right? But also, it's like we might be asking ourselves, those who are more marginalized, those with special needs, right? Like what happened to those students with like special needs, who need special devices in their school to be able to engage in the learning? What happened when they learn at home? Do they have access to those devices? What happened to those from the low social economic group, right? Where they do not have access to devices. And even if they have access to devices from their parents, that they do not have access to a stable internet, right? Or they might need to use the data plan, right? Which is often prepaid of their parents, right? And what happened to girls as well, especially those from the more rural, remote area, whereby girls are expected to babysit their siblings when they are at home in a home learning environment, right? They are supposed to cook, they are supposed to do the household chores, right? What happened to them as well, right? And if you trace the pandemic, when it hit us worse, right, back in April last year, right? If you look at Indonesia there, whereby the majority of the school system, the education system is closed, right through to September, it is still quite closed, right? And when we move to March this year, it starts to open up, and I think it is partially open with a lot of hybrid, blended learning, etc. And as we move towards September, quite recently, 1 month ago, right, I would say that, it's like the majority may be open, but there are still some that might be closed and some that are partially closed, right? So this have a huge impact to us in the education sector with respect to quality, equity, and efficiency, right? And I think one big issue that we as higher education students and lecturers that we do not engage enough in is this whole notion of equity and efficiency. Okay, let me explain the equity. I think equity will mean being inclusive, right? So like, how do we ensure that our teaching and learning, regardless of whether it's online, remote, or face-to-face, how could it be more inclusive, right? And we know that during the pandemic, definitely there's that huge threat about the inclusiveness of teaching and learning, right? Because we have got more than half of the population in Indonesia that do not have access, right? We don't even talk about the quality. Yes, I think the government have made a point, right, to deliver some of this instruction through television, right? I think they call it the education television, right? That's the attempt to do so, right? In some provinces, there's the attempt to do through the radio itself, right? But again, it's like how accessible it is still a big question mark. So we don't even need to be talking about quality when there is no accessibility, right? A big threat to the equity. And I think we really need to take that seriously. And if we are in the big city as well, like what happened to those students from the lower social economic group, right? I know that in the UNJ campus, right, you have a lot of hotspots whereby students can actually go to the wireless, which is fantastic, right? But what happens during home learning, right? They might most likely be using their data plan, right? Which again will be quite a burden, right, financially, given that there's the loss of jobs in many sectors, not just in Indonesia, all around the world. And of course, the whole issue of efficiency, we need to be thinking through a bit more. Efficiency as in, for us in higher education, are we producing the students? I think, we must be asking ourselves, are we producing developing students who are ready and in demand by the society and by the industries? Are the competencies relevant, right? Or are we preparing our students based on the traditional curriculum that we had, based on out-of-date curriculum that we had, for a society that is pre-pandemic and pre-AI, right? We do not want to end up doing that, right? So the whole notion of external efficiency is quite important, right? And how do we ensure that our students are able to learn how to learn? how could we ensure that our students are able to make decisions, not just in a robotic way, not just in a logical way, but in an ethical way as well, right? Could we teach AI to be ethical? Big question mark, right? I think being ethical is quite a human trait, right? that we need to be quite proud of, right? Like, could we teach AI to be able to approach a particular issue or a particular challenge from different perspectives? Yes, maybe to a certain extent through machine learning, through various rounds. But the thing is, we humans are able to do that, to be able to embrace diversities and take global perspectiveness, right, of different issues and challenges that we come across, right? So I think from that perspective, we in higher education, we need to look more seriously into equity and efficiency, right? So if what I've been talking about, if we in the higher education sector, if we are not able to address all these issues and challenges, from globalization to environmental decay, to social decay, to political upheaval, right through to right through to not being able to come to grips with the pandemic and trying to move on from the pandemic, I think it will be quite likely that we would end up with the pie chart on the right? Like, rather than actually dominating the global output and the consumption, right? The Asia would have a much smaller pie. Right, and the world would have a much smaller pie as well, right? You would see that if Asia is not able to meet up with those challenges, in fact, the pie of the whole world would be only about 1/3 of what that is predicted, right? And Asia would only take up like 1/3 of that global output and consumption, right? So, which means that in order for us to be able to achieve that pie chart on the left, right, we need to be able to make sense of all these issues and challenges, right? To be able to address all these economic, ecological, social, environmental issues that I presented to you, right? We do not want to fall into the middle income threat that one day in Asia, we are not able to compete, just like Brazil and South Africa, which actually started at the same level as South Korea, right? Back then in the 1970s. But if you take a look at the growth of South Korea, what they have done through stable government policies, but what is very important to is also the investment in education and also higher education, right? To be ensuring that the higher education is able to produce graduates that are able to not just add value to the low added value industries and services, but to be able to add value and to be able to drive, right, the value added industries, right, the high value added industries within the economy, right, and being able to do that in as an ethical way as possible that is globally engaging with that environmental awareness, with that social awareness, right? Which means that in such a world order, this new world order pre-pandemic, right, we want to be able to ensure that young people, right, the students that are now in this particular lecture itself, right, to be actually agents of change, right? Not just passive observers. So what if you know that there are all these issues and challenges? What are you going to do about it, right? You might acknowledge it, but what are you going to do about it as an individual and as a group of students, right? How are you going to be able to live together in an increasingly diverse and complex society, right? Where it's not just black and white, right? Whereby there are different shades of gray, right? How do you make sense of that complexity? How do you embrace the different, diverse perspective, diverse political inclination, right? And how do you reflect and interpret the fast changing information that you get, not just from your social media of Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook, right? But what you get from other websites as well, from the news, right? From government agencies. How do you make sense of all those information? Right. And the thing is, we want our young people to constantly critically examine local and global issues across boundaries, right? If you take this picture here, it could be any big cities in Asia, right? Of course, the Jakarta. You just need to go to Jalan Sudirman, and you would see this at least about 8 to 10 hours a day. The only time that you can drive through quite smoothly is at 2 a.m. probably, right? But that is besides the point. The point is, how do we really critically examine all these issues and feel for them enough, right? Which is not possible for robots at all, right? Feel for them enough to want to act upon them, right? By tapping upon emerging technologies, may it be social media, which is consisting of people, right? How do we get groups of people to act upon these issues, regardless of how small or how big it is? If we can't address global issues, which quite often we should not even try to attempt to do that, but how could we think global, right, and try to act local, right, within our community and within our region itself, right? Which means that would come to this whole notion of what then would be this set of competencies that we want to be able to actually develop within our higher education institutions. I reckon that when you take a look at it, some of them you have come across again and again, right? Critical thinking, creative thinking, problem solving, teamwork, right? Those are key, right? But I think it have actually becoming increasingly important, that global awareness and understanding. Global awareness is not just about being aware of what is going on, but also being understanding of what is going on. But by being able to understand, it's not just a cognitive function, right? It's actually about you as a human feeling the empathy, right? How do I see a particular issue or a particular action from another person's perspective, right? Why did they act in such a way, right? Why did, let's say, a group of terrorist cells, right? Why did they act in such a way? Are they fundamentally bad, right? So how do we empathize with their situation, right? It's by that empathy that we are able to address the deeper issue, right? It's not just about them carrying out the terrorist act, right? The terrorist act is just the outcome, right? But what are the roots? So when I talk about global awareness, it's not just about you being global minded. You have the global perspective. It's not just that. It's about having multiple perspectives, being as empathetic as possible as a human being, right? Being able to see things from different perspectives, right? That is key. That is huge, right? And that would have implications for teamwork as well, right? How do we work across teams? How do we work across interdisciplinary teams, right? How could an art major actually work with an engineering major on a particular issue? How does a Catholic or Christian work hand in hand with a Muslim, right? So if you take a look at the competencies, they are all intertwined as well, right? How do you even have teamwork if you're not globally aware? True, it's just not possible at all because you would not have that respect for each person's expertise and experience, right? You think that your way of thinking is the only way to address the issue, right? So we talk a lot about teamwork, but we just see teamwork as people working together, but we don't see different people working together. It can be different people from different background, from different socio-economic status, right? People from different races, from different religion, right? If you look at Jakarta, right, in the UNJ, right, it's not a homogeneous student population, right? You have got indigenous Indonesians, right? You have got like the Javanese, you have got Sundanese, you have got those from Kalimantan, you have got those from different religion as well. You have got Chinese, right? You've got Caucasian, right? So you have got that whole range, right? So how do you work together as a team if you don't have that empathy? Yeah. And that is also linked to this whole notion of effective communication, right? You're only able to communicate effectively if you have got empathy, right? If you're able to see things from other people's perspective, because communication is not just bringing across a message, right, to another person, it's receiving the message as well, right? If you are totally stubborn in your thinking, how could you receive messages, right? How could you digest the information that somebody has shared with you, right? And of course, linked to all this is the ethical decision making, right? How do we make decision ethically? Not just due to the rules, right, that our government have provided us or the university have provided us, but human ethics, human norms, societal norms. How do we make decisions based on that? How do we make decisions based on us being a human being in an ethical way, right? And what is an ethical way, right? So though there are some concepts that you see there, right, that are very common, but I think we need to be thinking much deeper because it's about trying to robot proof our higher education system, right, in such a way that very much as you want to be driving critical thinking, creative thinking, problem solving, but at the same time, trying to bring about that teamwork and effective communication and learning for life, you need that human factor of multi-perspectiveness. You need that human factor of empathy. You need that human factor, right, of being ethical, right, morally, and also society, based on the societal norms, right? this is actually a set of competencies in my university, right, that I want to share with you. And I'm quite sure you have that set in the UNJ as well, right? The problem is it's always there. And it is what our programs in undergraduate programs, in master programs, try to align ourselves to, right? But I don't think we have seriously sat down to discuss these competencies in detail. We just show them to our students. We just show them to our lecturers. But what do we exactly mean by reflective thinking, right? Because we talk about all this we talk about all this in a very logical way. We don't talk about all this from the human perspective, right? We talk about all these outcomes and all these competencies from the system perspective, right? Expecting our students to be able to develop all these competencies, expecting our lecturers to be developing all these competencies in their courses and their programs without deep diving, right, into some of these key outcomes. Okay, so even if you're looking at creative and innovativeness, right, if you take a look at this table itself, right, there's still a huge human factor there, aesthetic appreciation and creative expression. I mean, that is a human characteristic, right? That is something that we want to be able to develop as well. But we don't really discuss that with our students, right? We just show them that this is what we want you to achieve, right? And I've got to admit that we in Hong Kong, we are guilty of that as well. And it's something that I think we need more discussions on, right? This is about effective communication, social interactions, and global perspective. You could see that tolerance there, right? Could robot be tolerant and appreciate that cultural and intellectual diversity? Yes, you can teach it to do that, but tolerance is a human trait, right? Tolerance is only possible if there is empathy and compassion, right? Without empathy and compassion, where does tolerance exist? Right. And if there's no tolerance, there's no global perspectiveness. There's no it's not possible to embrace diversities, right? Because you would always have that stereotype. You would always have that so-called that racist mindset, right? In trying to approach a particular thing, right? So these are the competencies that we actually want to be able to develop. And I would say that these are the competencies that we really want to engage more with our students in terms of what do they understand by it and what do we understanding by it and how could we develop that together, right, in the program and in the courses that we teach, right? So this is what Dr. Humana shared with me. And when I look at the questions, I was like, wow, it's like, these are questions that I expect from Indonesian students,
These are not mine. These are my students.
Of course, it's your students. You're not capable of coming up with such intelligent questions, right? Only Indonesian students are capable of coming up with this, not Dr. Humana. He does not have that capacity to be able to come. I mean, like, these are huge questions and really insightful questions, right? That we should try to be able to address. And we have got more questions than this, but I'll just tease out this 6 questions. And I try to do it in such a way that is quite a good gender balance as well from some male students and female students, because when Dr. Humana sent me this, he actually like stated whether they are male or female students. So I thought it's quite cool to be able to try to do like 3 from female and 3 from male. Or in fact, I did 4 for female and 2 from male, because I reckon that usually in the education program, there's usually more female students than male students. Yeah, just like in the Hong Kong, right? So if you take a look at the questions, it really raises a lot of questions about what I have been talking about so far, right? How do we, as human beings, keep ourselves competitive when human-machine collaborative creativity becomes the new norm, right? So what type of competencies do we need beyond creativity, right? And I have actually stated some of those key competencies that we really need to have beyond this whole notion of being able to understand the potential of AI and robots, and being able to use it in a creative way, right? Talk about problem solving, teamwork, interdisciplinary team need for that global awareness, which means multi-perspectiveness, right? The second question, how are we supposed to make the best use of technology while maintaining our human nature, right? I think the key thing at times is as we actually immerse ourselves in technologies, right? We are actually still bringing a big part of us being human into it, right? So when we are using technologies, you would realize that the most well-used technologies with a lot of AI, with a lot of emerging technologies, big data, analytics going on, is actually social media, right? Social media without social is not media, which means that without people is no longer social media. So there is that huge human part there, right? But as we are making use of these technologies, are we losing our so-called humanness, right? Are we less empathetic? Are we more harsh? Because we are able to remain as anonymous as possible, are we taking away our kind human heart and become really harsh to our fellow human beings just because they do not buy into the same beliefs that we have, right? Are we using technology in such a way to hide ourselves, right? So how then could we keep track of that? So as we talk about technologies and how best to use technologies, I think one big thing that we always miss, and I am quite glad in the education technology program in UNJ, you have a component on cyber wellness, right? And I think there need to be more emphasis on that, cyber wellness. Like how, as we are using technologies, how should we not lose touch of us being human, right? How do we do it in such a way that there's that awareness that you cannot hide behind the so-called the computer, right? You can't hide behind technologies, right? And disengage yourself as a human being and not care about how other human beings would be responding to your post, right? It's not about the threat of being found out by the authority, right? But it's about the empathy that we have, right? That greater awareness of that multi-perspectiveness, right? That even when we are looking at posting, right? Are we going to be just looking at posting of just one party, right? That have one particular particular perspective, or are we looking at postings from different perspective and being able to put ourselves and being able to go into the shoes, right? To step into the shoes of those other parties, right? Who have very different type of perspective, right? The third question, in my attempt to nurture my daily life creativity, I often find myself trapped in robotic work while actually simply adhering to rules and regulations. There is always a tendency for us to do that. And like at times it is quite good that we are able to find that ritual in life. Right, like just before this lecture, I actually went for a run. Going for a run is quite a robotic thing, right? But I need to go for a run because it's a ritual in my life. I will not be able to give a good lecture if I didn't go for that run, right? So think it is about the awareness as well, right? The awareness about what being the human is about, right? And I think, again, it is something that sometimes, especially within the educational technology program, right, information system design program, it is something that we do not really talk about much, or we do not talk about enough, right? Sometimes there might be a course that just dedicate to that, but quite often, even within other courses, we don't really talk about that, right? It's just something that we just like take it for, like that we take it for granted. Okay, to the fourth question now. How EdTech experts are expected to play their roles in this robot-proof education, right? Think we probably need more conversations like this. And I'm quite sure Dr. Humana and the team in UNJ have already had a lot of such conversations before, getting you to be doing some of the readings, to be thinking through, right? And what we have here in this Studium Generale, right? It's just one of these conversations, one of these many other conversations that we are going to have when you're in the UNJ, right? About the role that you're supposed to play, right? As what I've said, is like, how do we create that awareness as EdTech experts, right? We do a lot about the potential of technologies, but have we done enough in recognizing the limitations of technologies, right? And how are we able to address that limitations? How are we able to address that limitation due to a lack of humanness, right? A lack the luxury of being as anonymous as possible, right? That people do not think twice in trying to lash out on another fellow human being, right? You see a lot of cyberbullying, right? In the entertainment industry, in the sports industry. So how do we raise that awareness about that, right? The fifth question, how would you suggest to people who have been so immersed in robotic habits to turn back to their unique, imaginative human being? Right. I think the only way is to start with more conversations. I would like to see the UNJ students to be conducting public lectures. You don't need a professor like myself or your dean or other professors in your faculty to be doing that, right? I think the public like to hear from another fellow so-called layman rather than an expert sharing their experiences. You know, it's like you could be sharing that experiences to teenagers, right? You speak the languages of teenagers. Dr. Humana and I, who are 50
Recording
something,
stopped.
right? We do not
Recording
do that,
in progress.
right? We do not do that at all, right? We do not speak the same lingo as teenagers. So it is up to you to be able to speak that lingo, to be able to reach out to them, right? You can have your own Studium Generale, so that you invite SMP students, where you invite SMR students, SMCAR students, right, to this big so-called webinar, right, whereby you are doing it, right? It's like those SMP students won't care about me, right? They won't care about Dr. Humana, right? They may not care about your dean as well, but they will care about what you say because you are their seniors, you speak the same lingo, you like the same things, right? You do like TikToks in the same way. That is very different from how Dr. Humana that would be doing TikTok, if he TikToks at all. Right. The last question is, I've been raised in a family that is molded away from self-discovery. Kindly envision how we can unlearn and relearn. It's not just in an Indonesian family. I think if you go to East Asia, it's like my own family. You go to South Asia, you go to a lot of Asian families. The kids are faced with that like problem. So how do schools, how do education system, how do the higher education actually provide that opportunity to reflect upon how they have been learning? Quite often when I gave my first lecture to undergraduates who just come from high school, including those in Australia as well, because I used to be teaching there for like about 5 years, right? They'll be asking me, Sir, Bapa, where is the lecture notes? Which book should we be reading? Right? Can you talk slower so that we can copy your notes? So that is that mentality of spoon feeding, right? Especially when they come from the school system, right? Or when they graduated from SMR coming into our higher education system, right? So it really depends a lot on our higher education system. Are we still going to carry on spoon feeding them? Or are we going to provide them with the support to learn how to learn, right? That is absolutely crucial, right? So I have tried to address all these questions that you have raised. And I thought I could be opening up to, say, like more questions now before I move on to the next part. Yeah, please.
Okay, take your drink. Take your rasa. Ibu Bapak, banyak sekali pesan yang beliau sudah sampaikan. Awalnya mungkin terasa lama, tapi beliau tadi menyampaikan latar belakang secara umum makro. Tapi makin ke sini, makin tampak sekali tingkat more specific and more concrete to what he was trying to tell us. So Ibu Bapak, sebelum kita berlanjut, tadi kata beliau, sila ada pertanyaan untuk disampaikan, apa beliau memerlukan umpan balik dari kita. Ibu Bapak boleh dan anak-anakku mahasiswa boleh nyampaikan dalam bahasa Indonesia in any language which I understand. Bisa disampaikan ke saya, nanti saya bantu untuk menerjemahkan. Ini contoh dari 6 pertanyaan anak-anak 2018 yang mau berbagi, dan betapa baiknya pertanyaan anak-anak ini, dan mereka tidak sangka bahwa pertanyaan ini dihargai oleh Prof. Lim. So jangan takut-takut yang malu-malu bertanya. Any questions are available. All questions are available. Oke, sila. Ya, bertanya, silakan. Hello. Perhaps you all muted. Semua di muted ya, jadi tidak bisa mendengar atau bagaimana?
Yeah, I think probably the host have muted all of them, right?
Yeah.
And it's quite difficult for them to raise hands. So
Yeah.
maybe if they want to be muted, they can type into the chat. They say unmute me.
Oh ya. Jadi mungkin yang memang di muted bisa kasih tanda raise hand supaya bisa bertanya.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lim.
Hi, afternoon.
Yeah. So I'm Ataya from Educational Technology 2018. So I have a question.
Ataya pasti.
So after this pandemic era, almost all students in every country are schooled from their home, and it makes the human interaction has decreased. So saya campur bahasa Indonesia aja Pak. Jadi interaksinya kita menurun ketika sekolah, interaksi antara guru dan siswa itu menurun, membuat sebuah humanity kita itu juga sepertinya berkurang gitu. Mulai dari yang tadi Prof. Lim itu udah menyebutkan seperti empati, awareness, perspektif. So how to tackle it setelah kita udah mau sekolah ini dan bertemu dengan orang-orang baru dengan kondisi yang berbeda. Ya, seperti itu Pak.
Okay, Professor Lim, she's Ataya. One of the questions. Her question was, how are we supposed to make the best use? That was her question. But today's question was around that when she was asking, how are we going to pretty much the same, like to turn back to the normal so-called pre-COVID-19 situation, when the interactions between teachers and students, instructors and students are not in good condition. They need push to get back themselves to the pre-COVID-19 condition.
Yeah. I mean, there are actually like two things which we may want to take note of. Think the pandemic itself have actually highlighted the importance of online learning. Right. It have actually highlighted that because it have highlighted the fact that in some schools, right, especially schools in the rural area, like I spent actually about 2 weeks in Jayawijaya in the schools there, right, and what I realized is that they always have a shortage of quality teachers, right. In some schools, even a shortage of the number of teachers. So you might have like one teacher for like 200 students in the school, right? So we are just like thinking about when you come back from the pandemic, right? The issues of the lack of quality teachers and the issue of a lack of even the number of teachers is still there, right? So how could we actually tap upon technologies in such a way that we can address that gap, right? That lack of quality and that lack of teacher, right? So how could we tap upon other teachers either in the city to be able to provide that set of instruction and to be working through the activities, right? So that is what the school system need to be thinking a bit more. Right. At the same time, the question is when they come back to the physical school. I think it is totally right that that it would take quite some time to go back to the practices pre-pandemic. But of course, the big question mark is the practices pre-pandemic the best practices that we have, right? Should we take it as an opportunity to revisit, right, the practices pre-pandemic and take this as an opportunity to try to rethink the practices, right? So I think we should not be in too much of a hurry to try to enforce the same practices again. But we should be in a greater hurry to try to rethink the practices, because we are assuming that the practices pre-pandemic is the best practices, and we know that that is not, right? In fact, we should learn from the pandemic, and we should use the pandemic as a way to reflect upon pre-pandemic practices and see, hey, what and how could we be improving upon? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Did you get the idea, Ataya?
Ya, sudah cukup baik. Pada dasarnya memang kita perlu yang namanya belajar dari situasi ini dan menyesuaikan dengan keadaan yang akan datang gitu. Dan perlu yang namanya refleksi juga. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Tidak apa-apa.
Okay. Now we have the Ari Fajar. It's not evening yet. It's afternoon, I suppose. Ari Fajar is a male's name. So you can let me read the question: how to convince others for future development of robot, because the needs of human always increasing. That's a good question.
Actually, it should be selamat siang, not selamat sore. Because the Hong Kong is just 1 hour ahead of Jakarta. Right, so selamat siang. How to convince other of the I think the problem at times with the AI and robot conversation is always black and white, right? And when we look at the politics as well, in the last 3 to 4 years, with all this tension, it's always black and white. You look at the US, it's either you are a Democrat or you are a Republican, right? And the thing is, when you look at countries in Southeast Asia, they expect you to be either pro-US or pro-China, right? There is no balanced view. But I think when we are looking at AI and robot, we want to avoid that black and white thing, right? We want to be presenting to public, as what I said. I think one great way to start is for the UNJ student to hold public seminars for SMP and SMR students. It's also a good publicity for UNJ to attract good students as well from SMR, right? But these public lectures can actually deal with the limitations of robot and AIs and how we as human beings could better interact with them, but also to highlight the potential of this AI and robots in such a way that is able to take over some of our tasks, which is very mundane, right? And therefore freeing us up to do the higher level stuff, right? And to also create the awareness that we need to be able to have that set of more higher level competencies of problem solving and creative thinking, and also that human traits of empathy, right, as well as tolerance and multi-perspectiveness, right, in order to be able to optimize the potential of AI and robots, right? So I am actually always for the idea of taking the middle path, but taking the middle path not because you want to be sitting on the fence, but taking the middle path by being aware of the limitations, how that limitations could be addressed. Taking the middle path by being aware of the potential and yet being able to take up that potential. I mean, that is what I hope the UNJ students would be able to do, right? And I would also really hope that the UNJ students could reach out to the community, because that is what universities should be doing, to be reaching out to the community, not just to be in this so-called ivory tower, right? Protected with their thinking and not sharing their thinking itself. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's been recorded, so I'm going to ask my department to do so.
Yeah.
That's very good advice. Shall we carry on to the next presentation, or?
Yeah. I would just like do up the last part in next 5 minutes or so. We would probably overrun slightly, but that is fine with me. I just got something at about 12:45, 12:50, so I still got time. So I'll try to.
Can we get the slides, the all slides?
Sure.
Later on.
Right. So what I'll do is to just do the last part now, and then maybe we could have one last question towards the end of the presentation. Yeah. Okay. So we have been talking quite a lot about it's like how to address it and all. But let me just share with you. So what then, I've got to take down the chat first. What then do we really expect our higher education system to be able to provide for our students? I would just share with you what most Hong Kong universities are doing from 2012-13 onwards, where we have a big revamp of the higher education system, because Hong Kong moved from a 3 years undergraduate system to a 4 years undergraduate system, right, back in 2012, right? So basically the teacher education program increased from 4 to 5 years as well. So instead of thinking about trying to squeeze in more content into the undergraduate system, what all universities in Hong Kong have done is to draw upon this whole idea of the total learning experience. Different universities call it differently. Some call it total learning experience, but I think the majority of them call it the whole person approach, right? How do we approach higher education in such a way that it is a whole person approach, right? A whole person approach is not just being pragmatic in terms of economic provision to ensure that we will have qualified manpower for employment in our industries and in our economy. Yes, that is absolutely important, right? As what the students will actually agree as well. If you could not bring back nasi goreng to your kids, right, and to your family, what good it is to talk about being a human, right? If you can't get employment, right? If you can't bring back basic nasi goreng back home, right? like much less to say, like, let's say satay ayam or chumi paka, right? But I think is what we want, definitely from the pragmatic point of view in higher education, we want to ensure that the graduates that we have are qualified. Just like in the AgTech program, we want to ensure that our graduates will be qualified AgTech professionals, AgTech teachers, when they graduate from our program. But the thing is, besides from that pragmatic perspective, right, I think we have come to terms with the fact that we need to be able to look at that enhancement of the quality of life of the students after graduation. Right? How do we develop that whole person? It's only by us being able to develop that whole person that we are able to robot-proof our higher education programs, right? If we are not able to develop that whole person, if we are just going to develop a student to be able to be a future employee somewhere, right, within the economy, right, I think we will never be able to robot-proof our higher education system, right? The only way to go is to take a whole person approach, right? To be able to look at the curriculum in such a way that it's not just about the major and the minors, right? But it's about trying to create that total learning experience of providing general education courses that deal with what does it mean by being a human, right? In having courses that might be very philosophical, right? Whereby you might have some, like there are some like general education courses in some of the universities in Hong Kong, including my university, that actually deals with the issue of life and death, right? Where we talk about whether we should actually be able to determine that a person could choose to die, right? Right. So those are very human-oriented type of courses, but also to be able to provide that overseas learning experiences. In fact, all Hong Kong universities now, I'm not saying that you should do that in UNJ. Each university student actually receive $1,500 US, right, for overseas learning experience. They could choose to take a course in mainland China. They could choose to take a course in Indonesia. They could choose to go for a summer program in another country like Singapore or Taiwan, right? So we want them to have that global perspectiveness, to have that understanding. We want them to engage in co-curricular activities whereby they could get credits for doing 39-hour community service, let's say in an old folks home or in a special needs program in the community, right, where it is credit bearing, right? So that we want them to be able to engage with the community. We want them to be able to see life from those who have special needs, right? Right. So if you look at those pillars besides the major and the minors are actually all credit bearing. It's not just something that good to have, right? They are all credit bearing. The language enhancement is something that we thought that our students need because coming from a Cantonese speaking school, because usually from SD to SMR, a lot of the subjects are taught in Cantonese. We want them to be effectively or functionally trilingual, right? English, Cantonese, and Putonghua, which is Mandarin, right? General education, as I said, not just dealing with their major and minors, but also dealing with the other aspects of being human and being engaged with community and global issues. Co-curricular, being able to go out to the community, being able to go out to serve the community. Overseas learning experience, no need to go far. They can just go across the border to Shenzhen, right? They can go to a more remote area in mainland China to serve in schools, to serve in the community, just to have that overseas learning experience. They can go for an overseas camp with that $1,500 US as a grant, right? Whereby they could get a credit for that overseas learning experience. Right, so based on this whole experience, we want students to be, we do not want us as lecturers to be monitoring and managing their learning. We want the students to be managing their learning, right? In a lot of the university, especially in my university, all the management of the learning is usually done through the system, both the academic management system managed by the students and also the e-portfolios that is managed by the students, right? Whereby they document their learning experience and their learning outcomes, right? And we want them to be consulting their academic advisors to choose what course to teach. No, to choose what course to take rather than we assigning them what course to take, as long as they have actually done their major and minor, right? We want to encourage interdisciplinary studies, right? Like my university is very Pendidikan, right? So we allow our students to take courses from other universities in Hong Kong as well. If they want to take a course in medical science, they could do that. If they want to take a course in liberal arts, they could do that as well, right? So we want them to be more interdisciplinary. And we want the whole notion of learning to be more complex, which means that now we are encouraging our teachers to create more authentic assessment. So as what I said, rather than an assessment, getting your students to be presenting to just their own classmates as a group presentation, right? Where the audience is so limited, it's just for other students and the lecturers. Why not the assignment, which is graded, be an assignment whereby the students are supposed to present a webinar to SMR students, right? That is very authentic, real world problem that they're trying to solve. That is about trying to think global and act local, but that would require the docents and the Maha docents in UNJ to rethink their mode of assessment. That the mode of assessment need not be just assessment within the classroom. They can take that assessment outside the classroom, right? And that assessment, they are being assessed of how they engage the community, right? I mean, that would be totally exciting. I'm not saying that we in my university is good at doing that. We are still trying. We are still in our infancy as well. But we could do that with our students. And I think the impact would just be amazing, right? And I'm quite sure that some of your students are already doing that to some extent, right? And I would like to see that being made a formal part of the AgTech program, right? I mean, we are AgTech. Why not we take leadership, right? Of showing other programs of how technologies could be used to engage the community if we are able to rethink the assessment, right? Right, and the things, of course, in terms of the technologies, I'm quite sure within the AgTech, it's like you deal with 3D like printing. We are constantly thinking through across programs in higher education, right? How we could use 3D printing in medicine, in dentistry, whereby we can't use live skeleton and live people, how we could be using 3D printing and AR in such a way that we are able to bring in reality into the classroom, right? So these are the potential that we would like to be able to articulate to people that we engage in, right? In fact, I would even see our EdTech students giving a lecture to professors from the medicine faculty in University of Indonesia, like in UI, right? Telling them what type of technologies they could explore, right? To make their lectures, to make their teaching activities more authentic, right? Like this is just an example of virtual reality as well. How you could cut down the cost. Like this is a biochemistry program whereby a biochemical reactor, right, could cost as much as $10,000, right? So how many universities in Indonesia could afford that, frankly, right? To let the students carry out experiment just over a year, and you must replace that bioreactor next year again, right? Spending US $10,000 every year, right? Why not explore using virtual reality, right? VR, right? In such a way that you could be carrying out those experiments. So that is what I mean by understanding the potential, right? And trying to be able to tap upon that potential. Massive open online courses, we talk about how great it is, right? About the quality that you have, how we could get UNJ, UI to create quality massive open online courses. But with those massive open online courses, it's not about quality. It's about how could we ensure that it is inclusive, right? Inclusivity is in terms of language. Inclusivity is about context, right? You might be producing the best teaching resources for schools in Jakarta. But to tell you the truth, these teaching resources on massive open online courses would be of no use if you're using in schools in Papua, right? Because the context is just so different, right? The students are just so different. We talk a lot about learning analytics as well, right? Big data, right? So how can we use big data in such a way that we can look into addressing at-risk students, right? To be looking at student retention, right? That is something that we could be tapping upon the potential of big data, right? And of course, games, right? How could we use games in such a way that we could promote creative thinking? We could be looking at problem solving as well, right? Without being addicted to games, which I'm quite sure many of the undergraduates are, which is normal, but again, trying to find that balance between engagement in games and not being disengaged from the real world, right? Losing that humanness from that real world, right? So it is actually it is really very exciting for us within the higher education system. A lot to think about, right? In terms of how we could design our curriculum, how we could design our courses, how could we do our assessment, right through to how technologies could be used, right? So I think due to time, we probably could have maybe just one question. I'll just pass it back to Dr. Humana. Yeah.
Ya, thank you, Prof. Lim. Beliau menawarkan satu pertanyaan lagi. Sebaiknya kita pakai bisa melalui tulisan atau bisa langsung bicara, tidak ada masalah. Bisa dalam bahasa Indonesia juga, begitu. Sorry. Oke, silakan.
Okay,
They
good
don't.
afternoon.
Sorry. Yeah. I think I'm familiar. I'm familiar with the voice. This is one of the questions creator. Honey. Yes.
Honey, yeah, honey.
Honey.
Oh no, they just milk the honey again. Please unmute honey.
Okay, thank you, host, for unmute me. Good afternoon, Prof. LIM Cher Ping. My name is Hani Atika. I'm from Educational Technology batch 2018. Sorry if my English is not good, but I will try it. I have a question for this topic. How would you imagine the biggest challenge when exploring this robot-proof in teacher education? That's it. My question. Thanks in advance. Thank you.
Yeah. The greatest challenge. Yeah, when you say the greatest challenge, that means you just want me to talk about one challenge. Yeah. Mean there are actually quite a number of greatest challenges, but if I'm actually going to say one, it would probably be back to the title of this presentation, right? To be able to be aware of the opportunities and the limitations of emerging technologies for us in the education sector. When I talk about the opportunities, I think quite a number of us in EdTech, we are aware of the opportunities, right? But the thing is, when you look at the opportunities, it could only be taken up if we are aware of the context of use of the emerging technologies. Without that awareness of the context, right? Because we cannot argue that a particular emerging technology that is relevant in a school, let's say in SD, right? In, let's say, di Senayang, okay? SD in di Senayang, which is right smack in the city, right? That same emerging technology should be used in the same way, right? As they in, let's say, as they in Pacitan, right? A smaller town city where SBY used to be from, his hometown, right? Yeah, Pacitan. It's like so like we cannot expect the emerging technology to be used the same way. But if we as education technologies, we expect that, then I think that is going to be such a huge challenge, right? That even if we are aware of the opportunities, we are not aware of the context. We must be aware of the context. And as we are being aware of the context, we must also be aware of the limitations. As what I said, one of the key limitations that we often do not talk to our students enough is about, as what Dr. Humana have emphasized, and what a lot of the questions have emphasized, about that humanness as you are engaged in using the emerging technologies, right? About the cyber wellness, right? About the loss of the human touch, right? So I think the only way to be able to do that is through conversations. But the conversation should not be just among ourselves, right? It should not be just among our education faculty and our education students. It should be with the public as well. It should be with, as what I said, it's like you could run Studium Generale for parents of SD students, right? That would be so exciting, right? Right. You could run the cyber wellness, cyber bullying Studium Generale for SMR students, SMP students who are always experiencing cyberbullying, right? Like so I think that could be one way of addressing those challenges, because I really would like the UNJ students, especially those in the AgTech program, right, to be, yes, it's like you want to address global issues, but in order to address it, you must act local first. And to act locally, you must engage the community, right? If you're just doing great assignment presentations in your class, what's the use? It's just for your classmates. You're just telling your lecturers and your classmates what they already know, nothing new. Why not tell the community what they may not know and what they may not be aware of? And that would be like the true. I know it is a challenge, and it is a challenge for us in our university as well, because dealing with an authentic situation is just so difficult, right? Yeah. So I hope I answer your question. I know that the past two students that asked the question are female students, so maybe we could have one last question by a male student, just to be fair. Yeah.
But actually, thank you, sir. This Aditya Paturaman happens to be a male student.
That's right. Okay, so we are done then. Good. Oh, yes. Like the one that did on the text, that's a male student. Yeah. So we have a good gender balance then.
Yeah. So would you like to address his question? Is this in Far East, so he's already in evening. The question is, how the robot-proof education can change the world so drastically? That's what he believes in now.
Yeah. I still refuse to say like salamat sorry, because the sun is still quite high up in Hong Kong, so it's still a salamat siang. So salamat siang. How the robot-proof education can change the world so drastically. The thing about the education is not something that we can change the world overnight, right? It's going to take years, it's going to take decades, but it's got to start somewhere, and it's got to start with the students, the AgTech students now, and it could start the change in, I would say, very gradually, right? If we could start to create awareness, if we start to engage the community, right? If we start by educating ourselves first about, as I said, the opportunities, what AgTech could bring to the school system, what AgTech could bring to the training environment, right? What AgTech could bring, or what technologies could bring to the society, but yet being aware of the limitations, right? So I think the only way of being able to change is through you, students, as the change agent, as what I've said in one of the slides. The only way that we are able to fulfill the Asian century is by having you as students as a change agent, right? What the AgTech team and the docent and Mahadocent and the professors in the education faculty in UNJ could do is to just provide you with the support. Provide you with the support, provide you with the guidance, provide you with the opportunities, right? But you, students, are the change agent, right? And how it could be done is through you, by engaging the community, by working in the community, by working with the community, by having the competencies of effective communication, by being able to work in teams, by able to make ethical decisions, by being able to embrace diversity, by being tolerant, respectful, right? taking on different views, by working in interdisciplinary team. So this will be the how. The how is you. You as a change agent. So it is back to this whole notion of robot-proofing the higher education system is really creating you students as change agent, right? With that set of competencies for change, right? If you're just going to be doing same old pre-pandemic as what the world is, then the Asian century is not going to really happen at all. And for me, as a 50-something-year-old man, just like Dr. Humana, right? I believe in Asia and I believe in Indonesia, right? Because we believe that we could support you to change. Thank you.
Thank you. Boleh tepuk tangan semua. Thank you for your time. It's exactly 2 hours from where we started. Ibu Retno sebagai Ketua Prodi, apa ada yang mau disampaikan? Tadi belum sempat barangkali ya. This is Ibu Retno, the department chair, or we call it study program coordinator, the department chair.
Yep, we have met before.
Selamat siang, Pak Lim.
Selamat siang.
I think this is the second time we meet. The first time is when we talk about the kurikulum Merdeka Belajar in February.
In May.
In May. Oh, in May.
Yeah, but it seems a long time ago.
Yes. And I heard you've been several times in UNJ, not only in Faculty of Education, but also in another faculty.
That's right. Yeah.
So you must be very popular in UNJ then.
No. Because I always enjoy interacting with the staff of UNJ, and also like the students as well. Yeah.
I can see that when you explain very clearly to clear our mind, very clearly, very patiently. And then I think this discussion could be benefit for all of our students. Terlihat dari, it can be seen by a lot of questions, and I think maybe still a lot of questions from our students. But I think that time is already 2 hours ya Pak Hirmana ya.
We cannot afford more than 2 hours.
For 1.5 hours. Terima kasih sekali lagi Pak Lim.
Terima kasih.
More than 2 hours ya. Ya, terima kasih sekali lagi Pak Lim. We really enjoy your speech. We really enjoy our discussion. We wish you good health, sehat selalu dan semangat selalu. Terima kasih Bapak.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to speak to you and all your students and the staff. It have always been my